Daniel Carter never imagined that putting his daughter to bed on an ordinary Friday night would change everything. When the doorbell rang at 7:30 p.m., he expected a neighbor, maybe a delivery. Instead, Victoria Langford, billionaire CEO, untouchable icon of power, stood on his modest porch with an offer that would shake his entire world. She wanted his child. Not his heart, not his love. Just his genetics and a temporary arrangement sealed with millions of dollars. What happened next would challenge everything Daniel believed about family, dignity, and the price of desperation. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because this journey goes places you won't expect. The glow from Emma's nightlight cast soft shadows across the small bedroom as Daniel Carter smoothed the blanket over his daughter's shoulders. At 6 years old, she still clutched the worn stuffed rabbit that had been with her since she was born. Since before Sarah died, before their world had narrowed to just the two of them. "One more story, Daddy?" Emma's voice was thick with sleep, her eyelids already drooping. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of dark hair from her forehead. "You already had two, Princess. That was the deal, remember?" "But I'm not even tired," she protested, even as a yawn betrayed her. I can see that." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Sweet dreams, Em. I love you to the moon and back." "And back again," she murmured, the completion of their nightly ritual, before her breathing began to slow and deepen. Daniel stood there for a moment, watching her in the dim light. These quiet moments at the end of each day were sacred to him, the proof that despite everything, despite the medical bills that kept piling up, despite the part-time job that barely covered rent, despite the weight of raising a child alone, he was doing something right. Emma was happy. She was loved. That had to be enough. He was halfway down the narrow hallway of their small two-bedroom apartment when the doorbell rang. Daniel froze. It was 7:30 on a Friday evening. He wasn't expecting anyone. The few friends he'd managed to maintain since Sarah's death 3 years ago knew better than to drop by unannounced. His evenings belonged to Emma, to homework, and dinner, and bedtime stories. The bell rang again, more insistent this time. Frowning, Daniel moved to the door and peered through the peephole. What he saw made him blink in confusion. A woman stood on his porch, but not just any woman. Even through the distorted fisheye lens, he recognized her immediately. Everyone in the city would have. Victoria Langford, the Victoria Langford, stood under his porch light like an apparition that had wandered out of the business section of the newspaper and into his decidedly unglamorous reality. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than his car, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Even standing still, she radiated the kind of power and authority that made boardrooms nervous and competitors hesitate. Daniel's mind raced. There had to be some mistake. Maybe she had the wrong address. Maybe she was lost, though that seemed absurd. Victoria Langford didn't get lost. She was the kind of person who always knew exactly where she was going. He opened the door, half expecting her to apologize and leave. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice was cool and precise, with an edge of expensive private school education. "Daniel Carter?" "Yes?" The word came out more uncertain than he'd intended. "Can I help you with something?" "My name is Victoria Langford. I wonder if I might come in and speak with you for a few minutes. I have a proposition that may interest you." Daniel stared at her. Up close, she was even more striking than her pictures suggested. Probably in her mid-30s, with dark eyes that missed nothing, and an expression that suggested she wasn't used to being refused. "I'm sorry, Ms. Langford, but I'm not sure why you're here. If this is about some kind of charity thing, I appreciate it, but this isn't about charity, Mr. Carter." Her gaze held steady, unflinching. "And I'd prefer to discuss this inside rather than on your doorstep, if you don't mind. I promise I won't take much of your time." Every instinct Daniel had told him to politely decline. Wealthy strangers showing up at your door after dark with mysterious propositions was the beginning of either a scam or a horror movie. But there was something about the way she stood there, utterly composed and yet somehow expectant, that made him hesitate. "Just give me a second." He stepped back, glancing down the hallway toward Emma's room. The door was closed, and he could hear nothing but silence. She was asleep. Okay, but only for a few minutes. Victoria stepped inside with the confidence of someone who was accustomed to getting what she wanted. Her eyes swept the small living room, the second-hand furniture, the crayon drawings on the refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway, the toys not quite put away in the corner, and if she judged any of it, her face didn't show it. Please, sit. Daniel gestured to the couch, suddenly aware of how inadequate everything in his home must seem to someone like her. The cushion had a faded spot where Emma liked to curl up and watch cartoons. There was a juice stain on the armrest that he'd never quite managed to get out. Victoria sat with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Daniel took the chair across from her, his mind still trying to catch up with the surreal nature of the situation. Mr. Carter, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you'll appreciate that approach. Victoria's voice was businesslike, matter of fact. I've come here to make you an offer, an unusual one, certainly, but one I hope you'll consider carefully before refusing. Okay. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his wariness increasing. I'm listening. I want to have a child, Victoria said, and the words dropped into the quiet room like stones into still water. But I have no interest in marriage or any form of romantic entanglement. What I'm proposing is a purely practical arrangement, a biological partnership, if you will, with appropriate compensation. For several long seconds, Daniel could only stare at her. His brain had stopped processing her words somewhere around, I want to have a child, and was now stuck in a loop of disbelief. I'm sorry, he finally managed. Are you asking me to? I'm proposing that you father a child with me, yes. Victoria's expression didn't change, as if she were discussing a business merger rather than something so fundamentally intimate. I've done extensive research, Mr. Carter. Your background, your character, your health history, all of it makes you an ideal candidate for what I'm looking for. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Daniel gripped the arms of his chair, trying to anchor himself to something real. You've been researching me? Of course. I don't make decisions like this lightly. Victoria reached into her briefcase. He hadn't even noticed she'd brought one, and pulled out a slim folder. You're 32 years old, in excellent health despite some financial challenges. You graduated from state with a degree in engineering, though you've been working in construction management since your wife's death. You're raising your daughter alone, and by all accounts, you're doing an admirable job. The clinical recitation of his life felt like a violation. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. You had me investigated. You had Emma investigated? I needed to know who I was approaching, Victoria said calmly. Surely you can understand that. No, Daniel said, his voice harder now. I can't understand that. I can't understand any of this. You show up at my home, tell me you've been digging into my private life, and then, what? You want to buy my sperm like it's some kind of commodity? For the first time, something flickered across Victoria's face. Not quite emotion, but perhaps a recognition that this wasn't going as smoothly as she'd anticipated. I understand this is unconventional. Unconventional? Daniel stood up abruptly. That's what you call this? You don't even know me. You've never met me before tonight, and you think you can just walk in here and what? Make me some kind of business proposal to create a human being? Victoria remained seated, her composure intact. I'm offering you $3 million, Mr. Carter. The number hung in the air between them like smoke. Daniel felt his heart stutter. $3 million, Victoria continued, to be transferred immediately upon conception. In exchange, you would agree to co-parent for the first 3 years of the child's life, 2 days a week, supervised initially, with the arrangement formally documented. After that, you would have the option to maintain contact or step back entirely, as you prefer. Daniel's mind reeled. $3 million. That was more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes of his current work. It was Emma's college fund. It was medical security. It was the freedom to stop working 60-hour weeks and actually be present for his daughter's childhood. It was also insane. You can't be serious, he said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. I'm completely serious. Victoria stood now, meeting his eyes directly. I'm 36 years old, Mr. Carter. I've built a company worth billions, but I've neglected the personal aspects of my life in the process. I want a child. I've wanted one for years. but I have neither the time nor the inclination for the romantic complications that traditionally precede parenthood. This arrangement would give us both something we need." "What I need," Daniel said, his voice shaking now with anger, "is for you to leave my home. I'm not some kind of stud service you can hire. That's my daughter sleeping down the hall, and this whole thing is exactly the kind of cold, calculating transaction that I would never expose her to." "You would be exposing her to financial stability," Victoria countered, "to opportunities you can't currently provide. I've seen your medical bills, Mr. Carter. Emma's asthma medications alone are straining your budget. What happens when the next emergency hits? When your car breaks down and you can't get to work? When— Get out." The words came out low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Victoria studied him for a moment, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Daniel saw something genuine in her expression. Not quite hurt, but perhaps disappointment. "I'm sorry if I've offended you," she said quietly. "That wasn't my intention." She reached into her suit pocket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the coffee table. "If you change your mind, my private number is on the back. The offer stands for the next 30 days. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't trust himself to speak without saying something he'd regret, no matter how justified it might be. Victoria walked to the door with the same measured grace she'd entered with. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at him one more time. "For what it's worth, Mr. Carter, I chose you not just because of genetics or background checks. I chose you because of the way you've loved your daughter despite overwhelming odds. That kind of devotion, that's what I want for my child. Think about it." And then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the business card on his coffee table as evidence she'd been there at all. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of his living room, his heart pounding, his thoughts a chaotic tangle. Slowly, he walked to the table and picked up the card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Victoria Langford, CEO, Langford Industries. On the back, written in elegant script, was a phone number. He should throw it away. He should forget this whole bizarre encounter ever happened. Instead, he found himself staring at it, Victoria's final words echoing in his mind. "That kind of devotion. That's what I want for my child." "Daddy?" Daniel spun around. Emma stood in the hallway, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Hey, princess, what are you doing up?" "I heard voices. Who was that lady?" Daniel's throat tightened. He forced a smile and crossed to her, scooping her up easily despite her growing size. "Nobody, Em. Just someone who had the wrong address." Emma yawned, resting her head on his shoulder. "She talked loud." "Yeah, she did. I'm sorry she woke you." He carried her back to her room, tucking her into bed for the second time that night. "Go back to sleep, okay?" "Okay, Daddy." Her eyes were already closing again. "Love you to the moon and back again," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. When he returned to the living room, he stood there in the dim light for a long time, Victoria's card still in his hand. Part of him wanted to tear it into pieces, to throw it in the trash and forget this night had ever happened. But another part he didn't want to acknowledge, kept thinking about Emma's inhaler that would need refilling next week, about the stack of bills on his desk, about the parent-teacher conference where Mrs. Henderson had gently suggested Emma might benefit from tutoring they couldn't afford. $3 million. The number felt obscene. It felt like a devil's bargain, a corruption of something sacred. And yet, Daniel walked to the window and looked out at the dark street, at the car in his driveway that needed new brakes, at the neighborhood where sirens sometimes woke Emma in the middle of the night, at the life he'd built from the rubble of loss and was desperately trying to maintain. What if Victoria was right? What if this was the answer he'd been too proud to see? "No," he said aloud to the empty room. "Absolutely not." But even as he said it, even as he told himself he could never consider such a thing, he slipped the business card into his pocket rather than throwing it away. Just in case. Just to have it. He didn't sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victoria's face, that strange combination of calculation and earnestness, the way she'd looked at his home, not with judgment, but with something almost like longing. "I chose you because of the way you've loved your daughter despite overwhelming odds." At 2 a.m., he got up and checked on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He thought about Sarah, about the promises they'd made to each other, about the future they'd planned that would never happen. Would she understand if he even considered Victoria's offer? Would she be horrified? Disappointed? He didn't know. That was perhaps the worst part. He genuinely didn't know anymore what Sarah would think, because the man he'd become since her death was someone she'd never met. The man who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, who clipped coupons and bought secondhand clothes, who lay awake at night doing math that never quite added up. By morning, Daniel had convinced himself the entire thing had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But when he reached into his pocket and felt the stiff edge of Victoria's business card, he knew it had been real. Over the next week, he tried to push the encounter out of his mind. He focused on work, on Emma, on the rhythms of their daily life. But Victoria's offer haunted him like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. He found himself thinking about it at strange moments, while making Emma's breakfast, while stuck in traffic, while lying awake in the dark. $3 million. What would that even look like? What would it mean? Emma could go to any college she wanted. She could have music lessons, art classes, everything he'd never been able to give her. They could live in a safe neighborhood with good schools. She could see specialists for her asthma instead of relying on the free clinic. She could have the childhood Sarah had wanted for her. But at what cost? Daniel wrestled with the moral dimensions of Victoria's proposal. Was it really so different from sperm donation, which thousands of people did every year? No, it was completely different, because Victoria wanted him involved, wanted him to be a co-parent. She wasn't asking for anonymous genetic material, she was asking for him. And there was something else, something he barely wanted to admit even to himself. A small part of him was intrigued by Victoria herself, not romantically, he couldn't even imagine that, but intellectually. There was a mystery to her, a puzzle in why someone with everything would want something so specific from him. 10 days after Victoria's visit, Emma had an asthma attack in the middle of the night. It wasn't severe, but it was bad enough that Daniel had to use her emergency inhaler, had to sit with her for hours making sure she could breathe properly, watching her struggle for air that came too hard. When the sun finally rose and Emma had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. The inhaler was nearly empty. He'd have to refill it, which meant another copay he couldn't quite afford. And the doctor had mentioned last month that Emma might need a specialist, might need testing to see if her asthma was getting worse. Testing that would cost thousands of dollars he didn't have. Daniel pulled Victoria's card from his wallet, where it had been living for the past week and a half. He stared at the number on the back, his thumb tracing the elegant digits. "This is insane," he told himself. "You can't actually be considering this." But he was considering it, had been considering it every day since Victoria left. And now, with Emma's labored breathing still echoing in his ears, with the weight of inadequacy crushing down on him, the consideration became something more concrete. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. "What are you doing?" his rational mind screamed. "This is crazy. This is wrong." But another voice, quieter, more desperate, whispered, "What if it's the only way?" Daniel dialed before he could change his mind. The phone rang once, twice. He almost hung up. Then, "This is Victoria Langford." Her voice was crisp and professional, the voice of someone already at work, though it was barely 7 a.m. Daniel's throat went dry. "Ms. Langford, this is Daniel Carter." There was a pause, brief but weighted. When Victoria spoke again, her tone had shifted, becoming less businesslike and more engaged. "Mr. Carter, I'm glad you called." "I haven't decided anything," Daniel said quickly, the words tumbling out. I wanted to talk, to understand this better, what you're really asking for. Of course, I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss this properly." He could hear the sound of pages turning, a calendar being consulted. "Are you available this evening? I could meet you somewhere private, somewhere we could talk openly." Daniel glanced toward Emma's room. His mother lived across town and occasionally watched Emma when he had to work late. He could probably arrange it. "Okay, yes. Where?" "There's a restaurant called Meridian downtown. Do you know it?" Daniel nearly laughed. Meridian was the kind of place that had a 6-month waiting list and entrees that cost more than his weekly grocery budget. "I know of it." I'll make a reservation for 8 o'clock. Private room. We won't be disturbed. Ms. Langford. Victoria, she interrupted gently. If we're going to have this conversation, please call me Victoria. Victoria, Daniel repeated, the name feeling strange in his mouth. I need you to understand, I'm not saying yes, I'm trying to understand why you're doing this. Why me? Why this way? I know, Victoria said, and for the first time he heard something almost warm in her voice. And I'll explain everything tonight, I promise. After they hung up, Daniel sat staring at his phone, wondering what he'd just set in motion. He'd taken the first step down a path that terrified him, that violated every principle he thought he held. But when he checked on Emma and saw her sleeping peacefully now, her breathing finally easy again, he thought maybe, just maybe, some principles were worth questioning if it meant keeping her safe. That evening, Daniel stood outside Meridian in his one good suit, the one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral and hadn't touched since. His mother had been surprised but willing when he'd asked her to watch Emma, commenting only that it was nice to see him getting out of the house for once. If only she knew. The restaurant was as intimidating as he'd feared, all dark wood and soft lighting and servers who moved with the kind of efficiency that suggested they took their jobs very seriously. The maitre d' barely glanced at Daniel before escorting him to a private room in the back, where Victoria already sat at a table set for 2. She'd traded her suit for something slightly less corporate, a dark blue dress that was elegant without being flashy. She stood when he entered, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said. Daniel shook her hand, noting its surprising warmth, its firm grip. "I'm still not sure why I did." "Curiosity," Victoria suggested, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Or perhaps desperation. Both are valid reasons. They sat, and a server immediately appeared to take their drink orders. Daniel asked for water. Victoria ordered wine for herself without pressuring him to join her. When they were alone again, Victoria folded her hands on the table and looked at him directly. "You want to know why?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Victoria took a breath, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression, a small crack in the perfect professional facade. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone in the business world," she began. "When I was 22, fresh out of Harvard Business School, I had a plan for my entire life. By 30, I'd be a VP. By 35, CEO of my own company. By 40, I'd step back and start a family." She paused, taking a sip of her wine. "I achieved the first 2 goals ahead of schedule, but 40 came and went, and I was still alone. Not because I couldn't find someone, I had plenty of options, but because every relationship I attempted felt incompatible with the life I'd built. The men I met either wanted me to be less ambitious or wanted to use my success for their own gain. None of them wanted me, just Victoria, the woman. They wanted Victoria Langford, the brand." Daniel listened, seeing her in a new light. The untouchable CEO suddenly seemed far more human. "A year ago, I went to see a fertility specialist," Victoria continued. "She told me my window was closing. If I wanted biological children, I needed to act soon. And I realized I didn't want to wait anymore. I didn't want to keep hoping that someday I'd meet someone who could accept all of me. I wanted a child. Now." "So why not just go to a sperm bank?" Daniel asked. "Why this elaborate arrangement?" "Because I don't want an anonymous donor," Victoria said simply. "I want my child to have a father. Not in the traditional sense, perhaps, but someone they can know, someone with a face and a story and a presence in their life. And I wanted to choose that person carefully." She leaned forward slightly. "I researched hundreds of potential candidates, Mr. Carter. Men with good genetics, stable backgrounds, decent character references. But most of them were essentially strangers. And those who weren't were typically married or otherwise unsuitable. Then my investigator mentioned you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "You're an investigator." "I employ a private security firm. They handle background checks for potential business partners." Victoria didn't look apologetic. "When your name came up, a widower, raising his daughter alone, by all accounts doing everything right despite financial hardship, I was intrigued, so I looked deeper." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo he recognized immediately, one from Emma's school last spring, where he'd volunteered for the field day. He was crouched down next to Emma, both of them laughing at something, his arm around her shoulders. "This picture," Victoria said softly, "is what convinced me. The way you look at her, there's no calculation there, no ulterior motive, just pure love. That's what I want for my child. Not money, not status, not genetic optimization. Just a father who knows how to love unconditionally." Daniel stared at the photo, his throat tight. "You could find that anywhere." "Could I?" Victoria challenged. "Most men in your situation would have jumped at my offer immediately. The money alone would solve every problem you have. But you threw me out of your house. You were offended, righteously so, at the idea that love could be reduced to a transaction. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. And yet here I am," Daniel said bitterly. "So what does that say about me?" "It says you're human," Victoria replied. "It says you love your daughter enough to consider uncomfortable options if it means giving her a better life. There's no shame in that." The server returned with their meals, dishes Daniel hadn't even ordered, but which Victoria had apparently arranged in advance. He picked at the food, his appetite gone. "Tell me honestly," he said after a long silence, "what would this really look like? The day-to-day of it?" Victoria set down her fork, giving him her full attention. "Initially, we would work with a fertility clinic. The conception would be medical, not personal. I want to be clear about that. Once I'm pregnant, you would have regular updates, but no obligations until the birth. And after? After we'd establish a co-parenting schedule, perhaps Sundays and Wednesdays to start, supervised visits where you could build a relationship with the child. We'd both have legal rights, both be listed on the birth certificate. The child would know you as their father." "For 3 years," Daniel said. "And then what?" "Then we reassess," Victoria said. "If the arrangement is working, we continue it. If not, if you want more involvement or less, if circumstances change, we adjust. I'm not trying to trap you into something permanent, Mr. Carter. I'm trying to give my child the best of both worlds, a mother who can provide every material advantage and a father who can teach them what truly matters." Daniel absorbed this, trying to imagine it, splitting his time between Emma and another child, another family that wasn't really a family, explaining to his daughter that she had a half-sibling who lived in a different world. "What about Emma?" he asked. "Have you thought about how this would affect her?" "Of course." Victoria's expression softened. "She'd be a big sister. That's significant. And the financial stability this arrangement would provide would benefit her directly. Better schools, better health care, opportunities you can't currently offer." "Bought with what, though?" Daniel demanded. "With me selling, what, my integrity, my principles?" "With you accepting help from an unconventional source?" Victoria countered. "Mr. Carter, Daniel, I'm not asking you to sell your soul. I'm offering you a partnership, unusual as it may be. We both get something we want. Where's the harm in that?" Daniel wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, he couldn't see the harm. Not really. Not when he thought about Emma's inhaler, about the specialist she needed, about the life he desperately wanted to give her, but couldn't afford. "I need time," he said finally. "This isn't something I can decide over dinner." "Take all the time you need," Victoria said. "Well, within reason. As I mentioned, biology sets certain constraints, but I'm not trying to rush you into something you're not comfortable with." They finished the meal in relative silence, though it was a less hostile silence than before. When the bill came, discreetly presented in a leather folder, Victoria handled it without fanfare, waving off Daniel's half-hearted offer to contribute. Outside the restaurant, they stood under the streetlights, the city alive around them with Friday night energy. "Thank you for meeting with me," Victoria said, "for listening with an open mind." "I haven't decided anything," Daniel reminded her. "I know, but you're here, and that's something." She pulled out another business card. Apparently she had an endless supply, and wrote something on the back. "That's my personal cell. Call me anytime, day or night, if you have questions. Or if you just need to talk through this with someone who understands what you're grappling with." Daniel took the card, pocketing it automatically. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you lonely?" The question hung between them, more intimate than anything they'd discussed over dinner. Victoria's carefully composed expression flickered, and for a moment Daniel saw past the armor to something raw underneath. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm very lonely, Daniel." And I'm tired of pretending I'm not. They stood there for another moment, two strangers connected by an impossible proposal, before Daniel nodded and turned toward his car. As he drove home through the dark streets, he thought about loneliness, Victoria's and his own, about how grief had carved him hollow, how single parenthood had isolated him from friends who couldn't understand his reality, how he sometimes went days speaking to no adult except Emma's teachers and the cashier at the grocery store. Maybe Victoria wasn't so different from him after all. Maybe they were both just desperately trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage of their lives. When he got home and relieved his mother, when he checked on Emma and found her sleeping peacefully, when he lay in his own bed staring at the ceiling, that's when Daniel finally admitted the truth to himself. He was going to say yes, not tonight, not tomorrow. But eventually, after he'd exhausted every rational argument against it, after he'd wrestled with his conscience and his pride and his fear, he was going to accept Victoria's offer, because love for his daughter was stronger than any principle. And if this was what it took to give her the life she deserved, then he would do it. Even if it meant stepping into territory he'd never imagined, even if it meant partnering with a woman he barely knew, to create a life neither of them could fully control. The decision terrified him. But the alternative, continuing to struggle, continuing to fail Emma in small ways every day, that terrified him more. Daniel made the call 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning after dropping Emma off at school. His hands shook as he dialed Victoria's number, and he almost hung up twice before she answered. "I'll do it," he said without preamble. "But I have conditions." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Victoria's voice, measured and calm. "I'm listening?" "Emma comes first, always. If at any point this arrangement affects her negatively, we stop. I don't care about the money. I don't care about contracts. If my daughter suffers, we're done." "Agreed," Victoria said without hesitation. "And I want to know you," Daniel continued, the words spilling out now that he'd started. "Not as some business partner, not as the mother of a child we're planning. If we're going to do this, I need to understand who you really are. Because right now you're just a stranger with a bizarre proposal, and I can't bring a child into the world with a stranger." This pause was longer. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had softened. "That's fair. More than fair, actually. What did you have in mind?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "Coffee? Lunch? Normal things that normal people do when they're trying to get to know each other?" "Normal," Victoria repeated, and he could hear something that might have been amusement in her tone. "I'm not sure I remember what that looks like, but I'm willing to try." They met for coffee the following Saturday at a small cafe far from the business district, far from anywhere Victoria might be recognized. She arrived in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down instead of pulled back, and Daniel almost didn't recognize her. Without the armor of her business attire, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," she said as she sat down across from him. "I almost didn't," Daniel replied honestly. "I've changed my mind about 20 times since Tuesday." "Only 20? I've changed mine at least 30. Victoria wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, not drinking, just holding it like she needed something to do with her hands. "I've been second-guessing this entire plan since I first knocked on your door." "Really? You seemed pretty confident that night." "I'm always confident in business meetings," Victoria said. "It's a survival skill. But this isn't business, is it? No matter how much I try to frame it that way." They talked for 2 hours that first meeting, carefully skirting around the arrangement that had brought them together, instead sharing pieces of their lives in the tentative way of people testing for common ground. Victoria told him about growing up in boarding schools while her father built his empire, about the pressure to be perfect, to be worthy of the Langford name. Daniel told her about meeting Sarah in college, about the brief, brilliant happiness of their early marriage before cancer had stolen her away. "I'm sorry," Victoria said when he finished, and the words sounded genuine rather than perfunctory. "Losing her so young, raising Emma alone, I can't imagine that kind of strength." "It's not strength," Daniel said quietly. "It's just survival. You do what you have to do because the alternative is falling apart, and I can't fall apart. Emma needs me." "Still," Victoria insisted, "that takes courage most people don't have." Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "What about you? Has there really never been anyone in all these years?" Victoria's smile was rueful. There have been people, just never the right people. Or maybe I was never the right person for them. When you spend your whole life learning to be untouchable, it's hard to suddenly figure out how to let someone close. Is that what you are? Daniel asked. Untouchable? I thought so, Victoria said, meeting his eyes. But lately I'm not so sure. The meetings became a regular thing after that. Every weekend, sometimes twice a week if their schedules allowed, they would meet at the cafe or take walks through the park or occasionally grab lunch at quiet restaurants where no one knew either of them. And slowly, incrementally, the strangeness began to fade. Daniel learned that Victoria had a weakness for terrible action movies and could quote entire scenes from films he'd never heard of. That she played piano beautifully but hadn't touched one in years because her penthouse didn't have room for a proper instrument. That she donated millions to charity every year but never attended the galas, sending representatives instead because she hated crowds and small talk. Victoria learned that Daniel had wanted to be an architect before life redirected him, that he still sketched buildings sometimes when he couldn't sleep, that his relationship with his mother was complicated by her disappointment in his choices, by her belief that he should have remarried and given Emma a real family, that he was terrified every single day that he wasn't enough for his daughter, that his love couldn't compensate for everything else he couldn't provide. You're more than enough, Victoria said one afternoon as they sat on a bench watching ducks on the pond. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and Emma can see that. You've never spent 5 minutes with me and Emma, Daniel pointed out. Victoria turned to look at him, something careful in her expression. Would you let me? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Meeting for coffee was one thing. Introducing Victoria to Emma, that was something else entirely. That made this real in a way it hadn't been before. I don't know how to explain you to her, Daniel said finally. She's 6. How do I tell her about any of this? You don't, Victoria said simply. Not yet. I could just be a friend, someone you know. We don't have to explain anything until there's actually something to explain. So 2 weeks later, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Victoria came to the park where Daniel and Emma usually spent their weekends. She brought a kite, an expensive, elaborate thing shaped like a dragon that Emma's eyes went wide at the sight of. Wow, Emma breathed, her initial shyness forgotten in the face of such a wonderful toy. Is that really for me? If you'd like it, Victoria said, kneeling down to Emma's level. I'm Victoria. I'm a friend of your dad's. I'm Emma. She looked at Daniel, silently asking permission. When he nodded, she turned back to Victoria with a gap-toothed smile. Do you know how to fly it? I have absolutely no idea, Victoria admitted. I've never flown a kite before. Do you think you could teach me? Emma giggled at the absurdity of teaching a grown-up something so basic, and just like that, the ice was broken. Daniel watched as his daughter dragged Victoria across the grass, explaining with great seriousness the proper technique for kite flying, while Victoria listened with complete attention as if Emma were imparting the secrets of the universe. The kite eventually got tangled in a tree, and Victoria laughed, really laughed, not the polite professional sound Daniel had heard a few times, but a genuine, unguarded expression of joy. As Emma declared them both terrible at this, and suggested they try the swings instead. She's wonderful, Victoria said quietly to Daniel, as Emma ran ahead to claim her favorite swing. You've done an amazing job with her. She makes it easy, Daniel said, but his throat was tight with emotion. Watching Victoria with Emma, seeing how naturally gentle she was, how patient, it made the whole impossible situation feel suddenly, startlingly possible. After that day, Victoria became a regular presence in their lives. She started joining them for their Sunday park visits, then for occasional Saturday morning breakfasts at the diner Emma loved. She showed up at Emma's school play with flowers, sat through the entire performance of 6-year-olds murdering a fairy tale with complete attention, and applauded enthusiastically at the end. You didn't have to come, Daniel said afterward as Emma ran off with her classmates, still in costume. I wanted to, Victoria said, and he could tell she meant it. Is that okay? Yeah, Daniel said, surprised to find it was true. Yeah, it's okay. Emma adored her. That was the part that surprised Daniel most. How quickly his daughter had taken to Victoria, how she would light up when Victoria arrived, how she started asking when Miss Victoria was coming to visit again. And Victoria, for all her boardroom steel and corporate precision, was utterly transformed around Emma. She played endless games of pretend, read stories in silly voices, listened to rambling six-year-old narratives about school drama with the same focus she probably brought to merger negotiations. "You're good with her," Daniel observed one evening after Emma had finally gone to bed, leaving the two of them alone in his small living room. Victoria had stayed for dinner, spaghetti that Emma had helped make, which meant there was sauce on half the kitchen, and somehow hadn't left yet. "I wasn't sure I would be," Victoria admitted. She was sitting on the floor, helping clean up the scattered toys that Emma had promised to put away but forgotten. Children always seemed like abstract concepts to me. Other people had them, but they existed in some separate category from my actual life. And now? Victoria looked up at him, something vulnerable in her expression. "Now I understand what I've been missing, all these years of building and acquiring and achieving, and I never realized the best things can't be purchased or planned. They're just this." She gestured around the small, cluttered apartment. "Messy dinners and bedtime stories, and a child who thinks I'm wonderful even though I'm completely winging it." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "You are wonderful with her, and you're not winging it nearly as much as you think." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Daniel had the strangest sense that they were standing on the edge of something significant, something that had nothing to do with their original arrangement. "Daniel," Victoria started, then stopped. "I want you to know that even if you changed your mind about our agreement, I would still want to be part of Emma's life. Part of your life. This friendship, it means something to me." "You'd really walk away from the whole plan?" Daniel asked. "Just like that?" "If you asked me to, yes." Victoria stood, brushing off her jeans. "I told you the first night we met. I don't want a transaction. I want a family. And if this is as close as I get, spending Sundays in the park with you and Emma, then that's enough." But it wasn't enough, Daniel realized. Not for him, and he suspected not for Victoria either. What had started as a business arrangement had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. A genuine connection, a friendship that felt essential in a way he couldn't quite articulate. 3 months after that first coffee shop meeting, they made the arrangement official. Lawyers drafted contracts, doctors scheduled appointments, and the clinical machinery of their agreement began to turn. But underneath the legal documents and medical procedures, something else was happening. Something that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with two lonely people who had somehow found each other. The fertility treatments began in early spring. Daniel accompanied Victoria to the clinic for the initial appointment, sitting in the waiting room while she met with specialists, feeling surreal and out of place among the other couples who all seemed to belong there in a way he didn't. "They think I'm your husband," he told Victoria afterward as they walked to their cars. "Does that bother you?" she asked. Daniel considered the question. "I don't know. Maybe it should, but it doesn't." Victoria smiled, reaching out to touch his arm briefly. "Good, because I'm glad you're here. I don't think I could do this alone." "You're not alone," Daniel said, and meant it. The process was more emotionally grueling than either of them had anticipated. The first attempt failed. So did the second. Victoria tried to maintain her usual composure, but Daniel could see the strain around her eyes, the way her hands would clench when the doctor delivered bad news. "Maybe it's not meant to happen," she said one evening after the third failed attempt. They were sitting in her penthouse, the first time he'd been there, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished by disappointment. Maybe this whole idea was foolish from the start. "It wasn't foolish," Daniel said firmly. He'd brought wine, something cheap that probably offended her expensive taste, but she'd poured them both glasses anyway. "And it's not over. We knew this might take time." "Did we?" Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I plan everything, Daniel. I research and strategize and make contingencies for my contingencies, but I can't control this. I can't make my body cooperate through sheer force of will." "No," Daniel agreed. "You can't. Welcome to the rest of humanity's experience." Victoria looked at him, startled, then laughed again. A real laugh this time. "Is that what this is? Being normal? Frustrating, isn't it?" "Absolutely terrible," she said, but she was smiling now. "How do people stand it?" We have wine, Daniel said, raising his glass. And friends who remind us it's going to be okay. Are we friends? Victoria asked softly. Really? Daniel thought about the past few months, about Sunday mornings, and Emma's laughter and conversations that stretched late into the evening, about how he'd started calling Victoria when something funny happened, wanting to share it with her, about how she'd shown up at his apartment at midnight once when Emma had the flu, bringing soup and medicine and staying until dawn to help. Yeah, he said, I think we are. Victoria's eyes were bright, though whether with tears or just the reflection of the city lights beyond her windows, he couldn't tell. Good. That's good. The fourth attempt worked. Victoria called him from the clinic, her voice shaking. Daniel, it's positive. The test is positive. Daniel sat down hard on his couch, his heart hammering. You're sure? They ran it twice. I'm pregnant. She laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. We did it. We actually did it. Victoria, that's... Daniel couldn't find words big enough. That's incredible. How do you feel? Terrified, she admitted, elated. Sick, actually physically sick. The doctor says that's normal. And grateful. Daniel, I'm so grateful you took a chance on this insane plan. They celebrated that weekend with Emma, though his daughter didn't know what they were really celebrating. Victoria brought champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Emma, and they toasted to new beginnings, while Emma demanded to know what that meant. It means good things are coming, Victoria said, ruffling Emma's hair with an affection that looked completely natural now. For all of us. Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, already distracted by the cupcakes Victoria had also brought. But later, after Emma was in bed, Daniel and Victoria sat on the small balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city. Are you happy? Daniel asked. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I've ever been truly happy before, she said finally. Content, yes. Satisfied with my achievements, certainly. But happy? This feeling right now, yes. I think this is what happy feels like. Good, Daniel said. You deserve it. So do you. Victoria turned to look at him, her expression serious. I know this arrangement started as a solution to my problem, but I hope it gives you something too. Peace of mind, maybe. Security for Emma. It's already given me more than that, Daniel said. The money had been transferred to his account the day the pregnancy was confirmed, and while the amount still made him dizzy to think about, it wasn't what he meant. It's given me you, this friendship. I didn't realize how isolated I'd become until I wasn't anymore. Victoria reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. I didn't realize how lonely I was until I met you and Emma, until I understood what I'd been missing all these years. They sat like that for a while, hands linked, watching the city lights blur in the distance. And Daniel thought about how strange life was, how the worst moments could somehow lead to unexpected grace, how saying yes to an impossible proposal had brought him here, to this moment of quiet connection with a woman who had started as a stranger and become something he couldn't quite define. As Victoria's pregnancy progressed, their dynamic shifted again. Daniel found himself protective in ways he hadn't anticipated, checking in on her constantly, worrying when she pushed herself too hard at work. I'm fine, Victoria insisted when he called her for the third time in one day. I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. I know, but the doctor said I should avoid stress and get plenty of rest, Victoria interrupted. I'm working on it. Victoria. Daniel. But her tone was fond rather than annoyed. I appreciate your concern, truly, but I've been taking care of myself for a very long time. I know my limits. Yeah, and I've watched you blow past those limits on a regular basis, Daniel countered. Just be careful, okay? For the baby. Victoria's voice softened. I will. I promise. Emma noticed the change too, with the perceptiveness of children. Why do you call Miss Victoria so much? She asked one morning at breakfast. Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. What do you mean? You're always talking to her on the phone, and she comes over a lot now. Like, all the time. Emma tilted her head, studying him with those two observant eyes. Do you like her? Of course I like her. She's my friend. No, I mean like her, like how Prince Eric likes Ariel in the movie. Emma? It's okay if you do, Emma said matter-of-factly. Mom's been gone a long time, and Miss Victoria is really nice. I wouldn't mind if she was around more. Daniel stared at his daughter, completely blindsided by this turn in the conversation. Sweetie, Victoria and we're not dating. We're just friends. Oh. Emma looked disappointed. That's too bad. I think she'd be a good girlfriend for you. After Emma left for school, Daniel sat alone in the quiet apartment, his daughter's words echoing in his head. Did he like Victoria? Not as a friend, not as the mother of the child they were creating together, but as a woman? The thought was terrifying, and also he realized with a jolt, not entirely unwelcome. He pushed it away, refusing to examine it too closely. Their situation was already complicated enough without adding romantic feelings to the mix. Besides, Victoria had been clear from the beginning. She didn't want romance. This was a practical arrangement, nothing more, except it had stopped being practical months ago. And they both knew it. The moment of truth came on a Tuesday evening in late October. Victoria had invited Daniel and Emma to her penthouse for dinner. She'd been practicing cooking, she said, and wanted to test her skills on willing subjects. Emma was delighted by the fancy apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and spare modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Can I live here? Emma asked, pressing her nose against the glass to look at the city below. You can visit any time you want, Victoria said, smiling. She was starting to show now, her pregnancy visible in the gentle curve of her belly, and Daniel caught himself staring more than once. Dinner was surprisingly good. Victoria had clearly taken lessons seriously, and afterward, while Emma watched a movie in the living room, Daniel helped clean up in the kitchen. This was nice, he said, drying a plate. Normal, almost. Almost, Victoria agreed. She was washing, her sleeves rolled up, looking more domestic than he'd ever seen her. Daniel, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever think about what happens after? She kept her eyes on the sink, not looking at him. After the baby is born, after the first 3 years. Do you think about what our relationship looks like then? Daniel set down the dish he'd been drying. Sometimes. Why? Because I do, Victoria said quietly. I think about it a lot, actually. And I've realized something. What's that? She finally turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her expression made his breath catch. I don't want you to leave. Not after 3 years. Not ever. I know that's not what we agreed to. I know this was supposed to be temporary, but Victoria, let me finish, she said, and he saw her hands were shaking slightly. These past few months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of the baby, though I'm thrilled about that, but because of you and Emma, because of feeling like I'm part of something real for the first time ever. And I'm terrified that when we hit that 3-year mark, you'll decide you've fulfilled your obligation and walk away. Daniel stood there, his heart pounding, aware that what he said next mattered enormously. What are you asking me, Victoria? I'm asking if there's any possibility that this could be more than an arrangement, she said, that we could be more than co-parents and friends. I'm asking if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, because I think She stopped, took a breath. I think I'm falling in love with you, Daniel, and I need to know if that's completely one-sided or if there's a chance you might feel the same way. The world seemed to stop. Daniel looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and saw everything he'd been trying not to see for months. The way she smiled at Emma, the way she listened when he talked, the way she'd somehow become essential to his daily life, the way his heart lifted every time she called, the way he found himself thinking about her at random moments, the way he'd started imagining a future that included her not as a legal obligation, but as a partner. It's not one-sided, he said, and watched hope bloom in her eyes. I've been trying not to feel it, because it seemed like it would complicate everything. But Victoria, I care about you. A lot. More than I've cared about anyone since Sarah. Really? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Really? Daniel stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. I think I've been falling for you too. I just didn't know if I was allowed to feel that way. Victoria laughed, the sound trembling with emotion. Allowed? Daniel, there are no rules here. We're making this up as we go. Then maybe we should make it up differently, Daniel said. Not as a business arrangement, as something real. I'd like that, Victoria said. I'd like that very much. They stood there in her kitchen, the moment stretching between them, and Daniel thought about how far they'd come from that first night on his porch. Emma called out, The movie's over. Can we go to the movies? Emma called out. The movie's over. Can we have dessert now? Victoria smiled, wiping at her eyes. We should probably… Yeah, Daniel agreed. But before they rejoined Emma, he reached out and took Victoria's hand, linking their fingers together. To be continued? Definitely to be continued, Victoria said, squeezing back. And as they walked back to the living room where Emma was waiting, still holding hands, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope, but genuine excitement for whatever came next. The conversation they started in Victoria's kitchen didn't end that night. Instead, it unfolded slowly over the following weeks in stolen moments between Emma's bedtime and Victoria's work calls, in quiet dinners where their hands would find each other across the table, in the careful way they were learning to be something more than friends, but not quite sure what to call it. Are we dating? Daniel asked one evening as they walked through the park, Emma running ahead to chase fallen leaves. Victoria was 6 months pregnant now, moving with the careful grace of someone carrying precious cargo. I don't know, Victoria admitted. I've never actually dated anyone properly. All my previous relationships started at business functions and ended when someone's ambition got in the way. Well, I'm fresh out of ambition, Daniel said with a smile, and I don't attend business functions. Perfect qualifications, Victoria teased, but her expression grew more serious. What do you want this to be, Daniel? He thought about it, watching Emma cartwheel across the grass with wild abandon. I want it to be real, whatever that means. I want to stop second-guessing every feeling I have around you. I want Emma to see that it's okay to care about someone new, that loving you doesn't mean forgetting her mother. Have you told her? Victoria asked quietly. About us? Not yet. I wanted to make sure we were sure first. Daniel glanced at her. Are you sure? Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The late afternoon sun caught in her hair, and Daniel was struck by how beautiful she looked. Not the polished corporate beauty from magazine covers, but something warmer, more genuine. I'm sure, she said. I've never been more sure of anything that wasn't related to a business decision. And that terrifies me, honestly, because I know how to navigate boardrooms, but I have no idea how to do this. Neither do I, Daniel said, but maybe we can figure it out together. They told Emma over hot chocolate at their favorite diner the following Sunday. Daniel had been nervous all morning, rehearsing different versions of the conversation, but in the end, he just went with the truth. Em, you know how you said you wouldn't mind if Victoria was around more? Emma looked up from her whipped cream, eyes bright with interest. Yeah? Well, Victoria and I have been talking, and we've decided we want to spend more time together, like official together. Does that make sense? Emma's face split into a grin so wide it made Daniel's chest ache. Like boyfriend and girlfriend? Something like that, Victoria said gently, reaching across the table to take Emma's hand. But that doesn't change how much your dad loves your mom, or how special she was. It just means there's room in our hearts for new people too. Like, I know that, Emma said, with the casual wisdom of children who understood more than adults gave them credit for. Mom's in heaven, but you're here. And I like you being here. She paused, her expression turning crafty. Does this mean I can call you Mom? The question landed like a thunderbolt. Victoria's eyes went wide, and Daniel saw her throat work as she tried to find words. I think that's something we should talk about later, Princess, Daniel said carefully. Victoria's going to be very special to us, but we don't need to rush into labels. But she's having a baby, Emma pointed out with 6-year-old logic. Doesn't that make her a mom? It does, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the emotion Daniel could see in her eyes. But being your mom is different, Emma. That's a title I would be honored to earn, but only if you want to give it to me, and only when it feels right. Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay, but I'm going to think about it. You do that, Victoria said, and Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. The first real date happened 2 weeks later. Daniel's mother agreed to watch Emma overnight, the first time she'd done so since Sarah's death. And Daniel took Victoria to a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood where nobody knew either of them. I feel like I'm in high school, Victoria confessed as they studied their menus. She'd worn a simple black dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Daniel couldn't stop looking at her. Nervous and excited and completely out of my depth. You run a billion-dollar company, Daniel pointed out. You negotiate with world leaders. How is dinner with me more intimidating than that? Because this matters more, Victoria said simply. Business I can control. This, us, I can't. And I'm not used to things I can't control. They talked through dinner about everything and nothing. Emma's upcoming school play, Victoria's plans for the nursery, Daniel's secret dream of one day designing a building that would outlast him. The conversation flowed easily, the way it always did between them, but underneath ran a current of something new and electric. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Victoria admitted over dessert. For you to wake up and realize this whole situation is insane and you want out. Victoria, I chose this, Daniel reminded her. I chose you, and I keep choosing you every day. Even though I'm demanding and stubborn and terrible at compromise? Especially because of those things, Daniel said, reaching across the table to take her hand. You know what you want, and you go after it. That's not a flaw. It's one of the things I admire most about you. You admire me? Victoria's voice was soft, vulnerable, in a way he rarely heard. Are you kidding? You're brilliant and driven, and you've built an empire from scratch. And somehow you still make time to learn how to braid Emma's hair and read Goodnight Moon 15 times in a row without complaining. Victoria laughed, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. The braiding still needs work. Emma doesn't care. She just loves that you try. They walked back to Victoria's car slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At her driver's side door, Victoria turned to face him, and Daniel saw his own nervous anticipation reflected in her expression. I should go, she said, but didn't move. Yeah, Daniel agreed, not stepping back. Daniel? Yeah? Would it be completely inappropriate if I kissed you right now? Daniel felt his heart kick against his ribs. I don't think there's an appropriate rulebook for our situation. Good point, Victoria said, and then she was kissing him, her hands coming up to frame his face, and Daniel forgot every reason this might be complicated. All he could think about was how right it felt, how perfectly she fit against him, how this moment was worth every second of doubt and fear that had led to it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Victoria rested her forehead against his. That was, yeah, Daniel said. It really was. They stood there in the parking lot, wrapped up in each other, and Daniel felt the last of his reservations crumble away. This wasn't a business arrangement anymore. This wasn't a practical solution to a problem. This was real and messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. The happiness lasted exactly 3 weeks before reality crashed back in with brutal force. It started small, Victoria mentioning casually over breakfast that she'd been looking at preschools for Emma. I thought you might want to consider Westfield Academy, she said, passing Daniel her tablet with the school's website pulled up. Their program is exceptional, and they have a strong focus on STEM education. Daniel glanced at the screen, then did a double take when he saw the tuition. Victoria, this school costs $40,000 a year. I'm aware, but Emma's incredibly bright, and a school like this would really nurture that potential. She's in first grade. She's doing fine at her current school. Fine isn't the same as thriving, Victoria countered, and there was an edge in her voice now. With your resources, our resources, we can give her opportunities most children never get. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that? Because she's my daughter, and I get to decide what's best for her, Daniel said, feeling his defenses rise. You can't just throw money at every situation and expect it to fix things. Victoria's expression cooled. I'm not trying to fix anything, I'm trying to help. By implying that the choices I've made for Emma aren't good enough? That's not what I said. But it's what you meant, Daniel shot back. You see a problem, a working-class kid in a public school, and your solution is to buy your way to a better outcome. And your solution is to let pride get in the way of Emma's future? Victoria's voice had gone sharp. This isn't about money, Daniel. It's about giving her every advantage we can. We, Daniel repeated. That's the problem right there. You keep saying we like you have equal say in Emma's life, but you don't. You're not her mother. The words hung in the air between them, vicious and final. Victoria flinched as if he'd slapped her. You're right, she said quietly, standing up from the table. I'm not. I apologize for overstepping. She left without another word, and Daniel sat alone in his kitchen feeling like the world's biggest asshole. He'd lashed out because she'd touched a nerve, The fear that he wasn't enough for Emma, that his choices were somehow inadequate. But Victoria hadn't deserved that cruelty, especially not when all she'd been trying to do was help. He called her that evening to apologize, but she didn't answer, or the next day, or the day after that. Her assistant politely informed him that Ms. Langford was unavailable and would return his call when her schedule permitted. "Daddy, where's Victoria?" Emma asked on Sunday morning when Victoria didn't show up for their usual park visit. "Is she sick?" "She's just busy with work, sweetie," Daniel said, the lie tasting bitter. "But she promised she'd come to my art show on Tuesday. Is she still coming?" Daniel looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt his chest constrict. "I don't know, Em. I hope so. Victoria didn't come to the art show. She sent flowers and a note apologizing, citing an unavoidable business commitment, and Emma's disappointment was almost worse than Daniel's own guilt. "Did you guys have a fight?" Emma asked that night as Daniel tucked her in. "What makes you think that?" "Because she's not here anymore, and you look sad all the time now." Emma's eyes were too knowing for a 6-year-old. "I thought you liked each other." "We do, Princess. Sometimes adults just disagree about things, and we need time to figure it out." "Well, you should figure it out fast," Emma said seriously, "because I miss her." "Me too," Daniel admitted quietly. The standoff lasted almost 2 weeks before Daniel finally swallowed his pride and showed up at Victoria's office. Her assistant tried to turn him away, but Daniel planted himself in the waiting area and refused to leave until Victoria agreed to see him. When she finally emerged from her office, she looked tired, shadows under her eyes, her pregnancy more prominent now at 7 months, her expression guarded. "Daniel, this isn't a good time." "I know. I'm sorry. But I needed to see you." He glanced around at the curious eyes of her staff. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Victoria hesitated, then nodded. She led him to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, closing the door behind them. "I was an ass," Daniel said before she could speak. "What I said about you not being Emma's mother, that was cruel and unfair, and I'm sorry." "You were right, though," Victoria said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm not her mother, and I don't have the right to make decisions about her life." "That's not—" "Victoria, you're important to both of us. Emma asks about you constantly. She's heartbroken that you haven't been around." "And whose fault is that?" Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. "You made it very clear that I was overstepping, so I stepped back. Isn't that what you wanted?" "No," Daniel said. "What I wanted was to have a conversation about it, not to push you away completely. I reacted badly because you hit a sore spot, but that doesn't mean you were wrong to care about Emma's education." Victoria crossed her arms, still defensive. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I miss you. Emma misses you, and I hate that we're fighting when we should be figuring this out together." "Together," Victoria repeated, something bitter in her tone. "That's a nice word, Daniel, but what does it actually mean? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you want my money and my affection, but not my input. You want me to be part of Emma's life, but only in the ways you approve of. That's not fair, isn't it?" Victoria moved closer, her eyes blazing. "You say you want a partner, but the first time I have an opinion that differs from yours, you shut me down and remind me of my place. How is that a partnership?" Daniel felt his own anger rising to meet hers. "My place? You're the one who tried to make a major decision about my daughter without even discussing it with me first. You just assumed I'd go along with whatever you decided because you're used to people doing what you want." "I showed you a website, Daniel. I didn't enroll her behind your back. I was trying to start a conversation. By presenting it as a done deal. Here's this amazing school. Why wouldn't we send Emma there? No discussion about whether it's the right fit, whether she'd even want to change schools, whether uprooting her life is worth some abstract academic advantage." "It's not abstract," Victoria shot back. "Education is the single most important investment we can make in a child's future. I thought you'd understand that." "I do understand it, but I also understand that Emma is happy where she is. She has friends, she likes her teacher, and she doesn't need to go to some elite academy to prove she's smart enough." "This isn't about proving anything." "Yes, it is," Daniel interrupted. "It's about you trying to fix something you see as broken. My life, my choices, the way I've been raising Emma. You look at all of it and see problems that need solving with your money and your connections." Victoria recoiled as if he'd struck her. "Is that really what you think? That I'm trying to fix you? Aren't you? Daniel demanded. The school, the suggestions about where we should live, the offers to help with Emma's medical expenses, even though I've told you I can handle it. It's all about you making my life more palatable to your standards. Or maybe, Victoria said, her voice shaking now, it's about me trying to build a life with you and not knowing how to do it without offering the only things I know how to give. Money is easy for me, Daniel. Resources, opportunities, solutions, I know how to provide those. What I don't know how to do is just be enough without them. The raw vulnerability in her words cut through Daniel's anger like a knife. He saw suddenly what he'd been too blind to recognize before. Victoria wasn't trying to fix him. She was trying to prove her own worth the only way she knew how. Victoria, no, let me finish, she said, swiping at her eyes. You're right that I'm used to solving problems with money. That's how I've survived my entire life. My father only paid attention to me when I brought home perfect grades or won awards. The people in my life only stuck around as long as I was useful to them. So yes, when I care about someone, I try to give them everything I can because I don't know what else I have to offer. You have yourself, Daniel said softly, his anger draining away. That's what Emma and I want. Not your money or your connections, just you. But what if that's not enough? Victoria's voice broke. What if I'm not enough without all the rest of it? Daniel crossed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms despite her initial resistance. You are enough. You've always been enough. The problem isn't that you're trying to help, it's that we haven't figured out how to make decisions together yet. We're both so used to being in control of our own lives that we don't know how to share that control. Victoria sagged against him, her hands fisting in his shirt. I hate fighting with you. I hate that I keep getting this wrong. You're not getting it wrong, Daniel said, pressing his lips to her hair. We're both figuring this out as we go, and sometimes we're going to mess up. I really thought the school would be good for Emma, Victoria said quietly. I wasn't trying to overstep. I just wanted to give her opportunities I never had as a child, a place where she could be herself without worrying about money or status or fitting in. I know, Daniel said. And maybe we should look at it together, actually discuss the pros and cons instead of me just shutting you down. But Victoria, you have to understand, Emma is the most important thing in my life. The thought of someone else making decisions about her, even someone I care about, it terrifies me. I understand that, and I should have been more sensitive to it. Victoria pulled back to look at him. I don't want to take over, Daniel. I want to be part of this. But I need you to let me in, really let me in, instead of keeping me at arm's length every time I get too close. You're right, Daniel admitted. I've been holding back because I'm scared. Scared that if I let you all the way in, you'll see that I'm barely keeping it together, that I don't have all the answers, that I'm terrified every single day that I'm failing Emma. You're not failing her, Victoria said fiercely. You're an amazing father, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You have me now, if you want me. I do want you, Daniel said. I'm just not always good at showing it. They stood there holding each other, the fight draining away to leave something more honest in its wake. It wasn't a perfect resolution. They'd have to learn how to navigate these conflicts better, how to communicate without hurting each other. But it was a start. Can we try something? Victoria asked after a long moment. What's that? Can we make a rule? Before either of us makes a decision that affects Emma or the baby or our relationship, we talk about it first. To really talk, not just present ideas as done deals, even if it's uncomfortable, even if we disagree. I can do that, Daniel said. On one condition. What? You have to tell me when I'm being an idiot and shutting you out. Don't just accept it and pull away. Call me on it. Victoria managed a small smile. I think I can manage that. Good. Daniel kissed her forehead. Now can you please come back? Emma is making me crazy asking when you're coming to visit. I've missed her too, Victoria admitted. And you? I've been miserable these past 2 weeks. Me too. They made their way to the elevator, Victoria's hand tucked into Daniel's, both of them aware that they'd crossed some important threshold. The fight had been brutal and necessary, forcing them to confront the fundamental question of what kind of relationship they were building. Not a fairy tale where everything magically worked out, but something real and messy and worth fighting for. As they stood in the elevator descending to the lobby, Victoria's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, feeling the baby kick. Daniel's hand joined hers, and they stood like that, connected by the life they'd created and the fragile, complicated love they were learning to build. "Are we going to be okay?" Victoria asked quietly. "Yeah," Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. "We're going to be okay. We just have to keep choosing each other, even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard," Victoria agreed. The elevator doors opened and they walked out into the bright afternoon together, already making plans for dinner with Emma, for the conversation they still needed to have about schools and boundaries and partnership. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But as Daniel glanced at Victoria, saw the determination in her eyes and the set of her shoulders, he felt something like hope. They were going to make this work. Not because it was convenient or comfortable, but because they'd both chosen to fight for it. And that, Daniel was learning, made all the difference. The weeks following their reconciliation were different. Not easier exactly, but more honest. Daniel and Victoria stopped pretending they had everything figured out and started navigating their relationship with the awkward sincerity of people learning a completely new language together. They had dinner at Daniel's apartment 3 nights later. The three of them squeezed around his small kitchen table. Emma monopolized the conversation, chattering about everything Victoria had missed during their 2-week separation, barely pausing to breathe between stories about school and friends, and the loose tooth that was super close to falling out. "I'm sorry I missed your art show," Victoria said when Emma finally stopped for a bite of pasta. "I heard your painting was incredible." "It was okay," Emma said with studied nonchalance, but Daniel could see she was pleased. "Mrs. Chen said I have a good eye for color, whatever that means." "It means you're talented," Victoria said. "Maybe sometime you could teach me? I'm terrible at art." Emma's eyes lit up. "Really? You want me to teach you?" "If you're willing to be patient with a hopeless student, absolutely." Daniel watched them, something warm and painful expanding in his chest. This was what he'd been afraid of losing during those awful 2 weeks. Not just Victoria, but the family they were becoming together. After Emma went to bed, Daniel and Victoria sat on the couch with cups of tea. Neither of them was really drinking. Victoria had her feet tucked under her, one hand resting on her belly, where the baby was doing what felt like gymnastics. "Active tonight?" Daniel asked, nodding at her stomach. "Very. I think he's training for the Olympics." Victoria paused. "Or she. We still don't know." They decided not to find out the sex, wanting at least one surprise in an arrangement that had been meticulously planned from the start. Daniel found himself oddly grateful for that choice now. It made the baby feel more real somehow, more like a person waiting to meet them rather than a carefully calculated outcome. "Can I?" Daniel gestured to her belly, and Victoria nodded, guiding his hand to where the movement was strongest. He felt a solid thump against his palm, then another, and laughed. "Wow, that's really something. Tell me about it. Try sleeping with this going on at 3 in the morning." They sat like that for a moment, Daniel's hand on Victoria's stomach, both of them marveling at the tangible proof of what they'd created. It felt surreal still that in just over 2 months there would be an actual baby, a person who would call them both parents. "I've been thinking about what you said," Daniel began carefully, "about the school thing, and I think maybe we should look at Westfield together. Not commit to anything, just see what it's like." Victoria turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You don't have to do that just because we fought." "I'm not. I'm doing it because you were right. I shut you down without really considering what you were saying, and that's not fair to you or to Emma." Daniel took a breath. "I realized something during those 2 weeks. I've been so focused on maintaining control over Emma's life that I forgot the whole point of accepting your offer in the first place was to give her opportunities I couldn't provide alone. It doesn't make sense to take your money, but reject your input." "Daniel, let me finish," he said gently. "I don't know if Westfield is the right choice. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I should at least be willing to have that conversation with you, to really listen instead of just reacting. Because you're going to be part of this baby's life and Emma's life, and that means your opinion matters." Victoria's eyes were bright. "Thank you. That means more than you know. Just promise me something. Anything. Promise that if I'm being stubborn or proud or stupid, you'll call me on it instead of just pulling away." "I can't read your mind, Victoria. I need you to tell me when I'm screwing up." I promise, Victoria said. As long as you promise the same, we're both learning how to do this. Deal. They scheduled a tour of Westfield Academy for the following week. Daniel had to take time off work, which his supervisor wasn't thrilled about, but he'd used so little vacation time in the past 3 years that they couldn't really refuse. Victoria picked them up in her car, a sleek black sedan that made Daniel's beat-up Honda look even more pathetic by comparison. Emma was vibrating with excitement in the back seat. "Is this school really fancy?" she asked for the third time. "It's nice," Victoria said diplomatically, "but remember, we're just looking, no decisions today." The campus was impressive, Daniel had to admit. Modern buildings arranged around green spaces, art installations scattered throughout, children in neat uniforms moving between classes with purpose. The director who gave them the tour was warm without being condescending, and she spoke about education with the kind of passion that reminded Daniel of Emma's current teacher, Mrs. Chen. "Our philosophy is centered on whole child development," the director explained as they walked through the science lab. "Academic excellence is important, of course, but so is emotional intelligence, creativity, and social responsibility." Emma was entranced by everything: the library with its floor-to-ceiling windows, the art studio where older students were working on elaborate projects, the garden where kindergartners were learning about plant biology. "What do you think?" Victoria asked quietly as Emma ran ahead to look at a sculpture. "It's incredible," Daniel admitted. "I can see why you thought of it. But I'm not sure Emma needs it. She's already thriving where she is." "Fair enough," Victoria said, and Daniel could tell she meant it. "It's an option. That's all I wanted, for it to be an option we considered together." They thanked the director and left with a packet of information that Daniel suspected cost more to print than his monthly grocery budget. In the car, Emma chattered about everything she'd seen, her enthusiasm infectious. "So would you want to go to school there?" Daniel asked, watching her in the rearview mirror. Emma scrunched up her nose, thinking hard. "It was really cool. But I don't know. My friends are at my school, and Mrs. Chen is there. Would I still get to see them?" "You could still be friends with them outside of school," Victoria offered. "But you're right. You wouldn't see them every day anymore." "Then I think I want to stay where I am," Emma decided. "Is that okay?" Daniel felt relief wash over him, though he tried to keep his voice neutral. "Of course it's okay, Princess. It's your choice." He glanced at Victoria, expecting disappointment, but she was smiling. "I think that's a very mature decision, Emma. You know what matters to you." Later, after they dropped Emma back at Daniel's apartment for her afternoon with Daniel's mother, Victoria, and Daniel sat in her car outside his building. "Thank you for that," Daniel said, "for being okay with Emma's choice." "Why wouldn't I be? She's right. Her friends and her teacher are important. Maybe in a few years she'll want to switch, or maybe she won't. Either way, at least now we've had the conversation." "Is this what it's going to be like?" Daniel asked. "Us disagreeing and then working it out like actual adults?" Victoria laughed. "I certainly hope so, though I'm sure we'll still have our moments." "Yeah," Daniel agreed, "but maybe they won't be as bad as the last one." "Maybe." Victoria reached over and took his hand. "Daniel, I want to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer before you give it." The seriousness in her tone made his stomach clench. "Okay. Where do you see this going? Us, I mean. In 6 months? In a year? In 5 years? What do you want this to be?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. A month ago, he might have hedged, might have given some vague answer about taking things as they came, but Victoria deserved honesty, and so did he. "I want this to be real," he said finally. "Not an arrangement, not a co-parenting agreement, a real family. You and me and Emma and the baby. I want Sunday mornings and grocery shopping and fights about whose turn it is to do the dishes. I want all of it, Victoria, the boring parts and the hard parts and the parts that don't make sense on paper." Victoria's breath caught. "Really?" "Really. I know it's complicated, I know we're still figuring things out, but yeah, that's what I want." Daniel turned to face her fully. "What do you want?" "The same thing," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've wanted it for a while now, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid you were just going along with this because of the arrangement, because of the money." "The money helped me say yes to meeting you," Daniel said. "But it's not why I'm still here. I'm here because I love you, Victoria. I think I have been for months, but I was too scared to admit it. You love me? Victoria's eyes were wide, vulnerable in a way that made her look years younger. Yeah, I do. Is that okay? Instead of answering, Victoria kissed him, her hands framing his face, and Daniel tasted salt and realized she was crying. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, she was smiling through her tears. I love you too, she said. So much it terrifies me. Good terrified or bad terrified? Good terrified, Victoria assured him, the kind where you're afraid of losing something precious, not afraid of having it in the first place. They sat in the car talking until the windows fogged up, making plans and promises, admitting fears and hopes they'd been too cautious to share before. And when Daniel finally went inside, he felt lighter than he had in years, like something that had been broken inside him was finally starting to heal. The baby came 6 weeks later on a cold December morning. Victoria's water broke at 4 a.m., and she called Daniel in a voice that was trying very hard to sound calm and failing completely. It's happening, she said. The baby's coming. Daniel was at her penthouse in 20 minutes, having called his mother to stay with Emma. He found Victoria timing contractions with the same focused intensity she probably brought to board meetings, her overnight bag already packed and waiting by the door. How far apart? He asked. 7 minutes. We should go. The drive to the hospital felt both endless and impossibly fast. Victoria gripped his hand through contractions, her breathing carefully controlled, and Daniel found himself murmuring encouragement that probably didn't help but felt necessary anyway. You're doing great, he said as they pulled up to the emergency entrance. I haven't done anything yet, Victoria pointed out, but she squeezed his hand gratefully. The labor was long and difficult. Victoria had planned for an unmedicated birth, determined to maintain control even in this. But after 16 hours of increasing pain, she finally accepted the epidural the nurses had been gently suggesting. This is not going according to plan, she said through gritted teeth as the anesthesiologist worked. Plans are overrated, Daniel said, smoothing her sweat-dampened hair back from her forehead. You're doing amazing. I'm a mess. You're beautiful. Victoria laughed weakly. You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the effort. 22 hours after her water broke, Victoria gave birth to a tiny, perfect baby girl with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. The nurse placed her on Victoria's chest, and Daniel watched his composed, untouchable CEO completely fall apart, sobbing as she held her daughter for the first time. Hi, Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. Hi, sweetheart. I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you. Daniel felt his own eyes burning as he looked at them. Victoria and their daughter, this impossible family they'd created from a business proposition and stubborn hope. She's perfect, he said, his voice rough. She really is, Victoria agreed, looking up at him with wonder. We made a person, Daniel, an actual person. They named her Sophie Claire. Sophie because Victoria had always loved the name, Claire after Sarah, because Daniel wanted his first daughter's mother to be part of this new beginning. Victoria had suggested it herself, understanding that honoring the past didn't diminish the present. Emma met her baby sister the next day, climbing carefully onto the hospital bed to peer at the tiny bundle in Victoria's arms. She's so small, Emma breathed, her eyes huge. Can I hold her? Victoria showed her how to support Sophie's head, and Daniel's heart nearly exploded watching Emma cradle her baby sister with infinite gentleness, her expression one of complete awe. Hi, Sophie, Emma whispered. I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you so many things. Over the next few weeks, they settled into the exhausting rhythm of life with a newborn. Victoria had taken maternity leave, her first real break from work in over a decade, and moved temporarily into a guest room at Daniel's apartment because his place was closer to Emma's school. The apartment was too small for all of them, everyone constantly tripping over baby equipment and each other, but somehow it worked. Daniel woke one night to find the guest room empty, Victoria's bed unused. He found her in the living room, Sophie asleep on her chest, both of them bathed in the blue glow of late-night television. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. She was fussy. I didn't want to wake everyone. Victoria looked down at Sophie with an expression of such fierce love it made Daniel's chest ache. I still can't believe she's real, that this is real. Daniel sat down beside them, carefully so as not to disturb the baby. Are you happy? Happier than I ever imagined I could be, Victoria said, and terrified every second that I'm doing it wrong. Welcome to parenthood, Daniel said with a smile. That feeling never goes away. Is it like this with Emma? This overwhelming love mixed with constant fear? Every single day, Daniel confirmed. But it gets a little easier. You learn to trust yourself. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, Sophie still sleeping peacefully between them. I'm glad you're here. I don't think I could do this alone. You could, Daniel said. You're stronger than you think. But you don't have to. That's the whole point. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Sophie's tiny snores, and Daniel thought about how far they'd come from that first awkward encounter on his porch. How Victoria had transformed from an intimidating stranger with an outrageous proposal into this. A woman he loved, a partner who made him laugh, a mother who approached parenthood with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything else. Daniel? Victoria's voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah? Marry me. For a moment, Daniel thought he'd misheard. He pulled back to look at her, searching her face in the dim light. What? Marry me, Victoria repeated, more firmly now. I know this is backwards. I know we did everything in the wrong order, but I don't care. I want to marry you. I want Emma and Sophie to grow up knowing we chose this, chose each other, chose to be a real family. So marry me. Daniel felt his heart hammering in his chest. You're serious. Completely serious. I love you, Daniel Carter. I love Emma. I love this chaotic, messy, perfect life we're building, and I want to make it official. Yeah, you know this is traditionally the man's job, Daniel said, but he was smiling. Proposing. Since when have we done anything traditional? Victoria challenged. Besides, I'm tired of waiting for things. I spent too many years waiting, planning, trying to time everything perfectly. I don't want to wait anymore. Daniel thought about saying yes immediately, but something made him pause. Can you give me a week? Victoria's face fell slightly. Oh, of course. I shouldn't have… No, Daniel interrupted. It's not that I don't want to. I do. But I want to do this right. Will you trust me for 1 week? Curiosity replaced disappointment in Victoria's expression. Okay, 1 week. Daniel spent that week in a flurry of secret planning. He enlisted Emma's help, which she gave enthusiastically once she understood what was happening. Together, they picked out a ring, not the massive diamond Victoria could have bought herself, but a simple sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds that the jeweler assured them was elegant and timeless. She's going to love it, Emma declared with the confidence of someone who knew nothing about jewelry but everything about Victoria. Daniel also made a call he'd been avoiding for months to Sarah's parents, who lived across the country and who he hadn't spoken to since Emma's 5th birthday. The conversation was difficult, filled with old grief and complicated emotions, but when he explained about Victoria and Sophie and Emma's happiness, Sarah's mother had cried. She would want you to be happy, she said. Sarah loved you so much, Daniel. She'd want you to live. I know, Daniel said quietly. I'm trying. The proposal happened on a Sunday morning 2 weeks before Christmas. Daniel had convinced Victoria to let Emma spend the night at his mother's house. Sophie too, though Victoria had been reluctant to be away from the baby for that long. It's 1 night, Daniel had assured her, and I have a surprise planned. He took Victoria to the park where they'd had their first meeting with Emma, where Victoria had brought that dragon kite and won his daughter's heart. It was cold and quiet, frost still clinging to the grass, and Victoria looked at him with questions in her eyes. Why are we here? She asked. Because this is where it started, Daniel said, where I first saw that you weren't just some corporate powerhouse making a business deal, where I saw you with Emma and started to understand that you wanted this, really wanted it, for all the right reasons. He took her hand and Victoria's eyes went wide as he dropped to one knee. I know you already asked me, Daniel said, but I wanted to ask you too. Not because it's traditional, but because I want you to hear it from me. Victoria Langford, you walked into my life with the most insane proposal I'd ever heard, and somehow it turned into the best thing that ever happened to me. You've given me Sophie. You've given Emma a mother who adores her. You've given me a partner and a friend and a love I thought I'd lost forever. So yes, I'll marry you. But also, will you marry me? He pulled out the ring box, opening it to reveal the sapphire catching the winter sunlight. Victoria's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him up to kiss him, both of them grinning like idiots, and for a moment everything was perfect and simple and right. "Emma picked it out," Daniel said when they finally pulled apart. "Well, we picked it out together. She has very strong opinions about jewelry, it turns out." "It's perfect," Victoria said, holding up her hand to admire the ring. "She has excellent taste." "She also wants to be a bridesmaid," Daniel warned. "She's already planning her dress." Victoria laughed, pure joy in the sound. "Then she'll be the most beautiful bridesmaid anyone's ever seen." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the courthouse with just Emma and Sophie and a handful of close friends present. Victoria wore a simple cream dress, Emma wore the princess gown she'd picked out herself, and Sophie slept through the entire thing in her carrier. It wasn't the elaborate wedding Victoria's status might have suggested, but it was perfect, honest and real, and theirs. "I love you," Victoria whispered as they exchanged rings, and Daniel could see in her eyes that she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I love you too," he said. "All of you. Forever." And as they kissed to seal their vows, as Emma cheered and Sophie stirred but didn't wake, Daniel thought about that night a year ago when Victoria had knocked on his door with her impossible proposal. How terrified he'd been. How certain that nothing good could come from such an arrangement. How wrong he'd been about everything except the most important thing, that sometimes the best families were the ones you chose, the ones you built from hope and trust, and the courage to say yes to something that didn't make sense on paper but felt right in every way that mattered. The first year of marriage was harder than either of them had anticipated. Not because they didn't love each other, that had never been in question, but because loving someone and building a life with them turned out to be two entirely different challenges. They moved into a new house 6 months after the wedding, something Victoria had insisted on despite Daniel's protests about needing their own space. It was a compromise, not the mansion Victoria could have afforded, but a comfortable 4-bedroom in a good neighborhood with excellent schools and a backyard where Emma could play. "It's too much," Daniel had said when Victoria first showed him the listing. "It's a home," Victoria had countered, "for our family. Let me give us this, Daniel, please." He'd relented, though it still made him uncomfortable sometimes, walking through rooms that cost more than he'd made in 5 years. But watching Emma run through the backyard, seeing Sophie take her first steps on the hardwood floors of the living room, he had to admit Victoria had been right. This was a home in a way his cramped apartment had never quite been. But domesticity brought its own tensions. Victoria was used to staff handling household tasks, cleaning, cooking, laundry. Daniel was used to doing everything himself. Their first real fight in the new house came when Victoria hired a housekeeper without discussing it. "I thought I was helping," Victoria said, her voice tight with frustration. "You're always exhausted, always doing laundry or dishes or cleaning. I thought this would take some pressure off." "By making me feel like I can't take care of my own house?" Daniel shot back. "I don't need someone else doing my work for me." "It's not your work. It's our work. And there's no shame in accepting help." Victoria's voice had risen, and from upstairs they heard Sophie start to cry, disturbed by the noise. They'd stood there in their beautiful kitchen, glaring at each other, both knowing they were really arguing about something deeper, about pride and independence and the fundamental differences in how they'd been raised. Eventually, they'd compromised. The housekeeper came once a week instead of daily, and Daniel had grudgingly admitted that having help wasn't the same as being incompetent. But the real test came 8 months into their marriage when Victoria started talking about having another baby. "I know Sophie's still so young," she said one night as they lay in bed, Sophie finally asleep after a marathon bedtime routine. "But I don't want to wait too long. I'm almost 38, Daniel. My window is closing." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Victoria, we just got Sophie to sleep through the night. We're barely keeping our heads above water as it is. I know it's a lot, but I've always wanted more than one child. I don't want Sophie to grow up alone the way I did." "She has Emma," Daniel pointed out. "She's not alone." "You know what I mean." Victoria rolled onto her side to face him. "I want her to have a full sibling, someone who shares both her parents." The words stung more than Victoria probably intended. Daniel knew she didn't mean it as a criticism of Emma, but it landed that way nonetheless. A reminder that for all their family unity, There were still divisions, still his and hers mixed in with theirs. I need to think about this, Daniel said carefully. It's not something I can just decide right now. Victoria's face fell. Of course, take all the time you need. But Daniel could hear the disappointment in her voice, could feel the distance opening between them again. They'd been here before, Victoria wanting something, Daniel hesitating, both of them struggling to find common ground between their different visions of the future. He thought about it for weeks, weighing his own exhaustion against Victoria's longing, his fears against her hopes. Finally, he brought it up again on a Sunday afternoon while Emma was at a birthday party and Sophie was napping. I've been thinking about what you said, Daniel began. About another baby. Victoria looked up from her laptop, hope and caution warring in her expression. And I think we should try, Daniel said. Not because I'm completely ready. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely ready. But because I understand why it's important to you. And because I want our family to be everything we both dream it can be. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Really? You mean it? On one condition, Daniel added. If it doesn't happen easily, we don't put ourselves through what we did last time. The stress, the disappointment. We try, and if it works, wonderful. If it doesn't, we accept that Sophie is enough. Sophie is already enough, Victoria said, moving to sit beside him on the couch. But yes, I agree to that. They tried for 6 months with no success. Each negative test was a small heartbreak, but they'd both agreed not to pursue fertility treatments again, not to let the process consume them the way it had before Sophie. Instead, they focused on the family they had. Emma thriving in 2nd grade, Sophie growing from a baby into a toddler with opinions about everything. Maybe it's not meant to happen, Victoria said one evening after another negative test. She sounded resigned rather than devastated, which Daniel took as a good sign. Maybe, he agreed. Or maybe we're supposed to grow our family a different way. Victoria looked at him curiously. What do you mean? I've been thinking about adoption, Daniel said carefully. There are so many kids who need families. Maybe that's our path. He'd expected resistance, expected Victoria to reject the idea of raising someone else's biological child. But instead, she was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I never considered it, she admitted. But maybe I should have. Tell me more about what you're thinking. They started researching that week, attending information sessions and talking to social workers. The process was daunting, home studies, background checks, endless paperwork. But for the first time in months, Daniel felt a sense of rightness about the direction they were heading. There are so many older children in the system, their social worker Janet explained during one of their meetings. Kids who've been passed over because everyone wants babies, but they need families just as much, maybe more. How old are we talking? Victoria asked. Anywhere from 5 to 18, though realistically most families looking to adopt prefer younger children. That night, Daniel and Victoria had a long conversation about what they wanted, what they could handle, what felt right. Emma, now 7.5, was part of the discussion too. I think it would be cool to have an older sister or brother, Emma said seriously. Someone who could teach me stuff instead of me always being the teacher. You're very good at teaching Sophie, Victoria assured her. Yeah, but she's 2. She doesn't know anything yet. Emma paused. What if they don't like us? The new kid, I mean. That's a risk, Daniel acknowledged. We might not be the right fit for every child, and not every child will be the right fit for us. But if we find the right match, it'll be worth it. 3 months into the process, Janet called with a potential match. Her name was Mila. She was 8 years old, and she had moderate hearing loss that had made it difficult to place her with a family. Most prospective parents get nervous about the medical needs, Janet explained over the phone. But Mila is an incredible kid. Smart, resilient, artistic. She just needs a family willing to learn sign language and advocate for her needs. Can we meet her? Victoria asked, already pulling up information about childhood hearing loss on her laptop. They met Mila 2 weeks later at the foster agency's office. She was small for 8, with long dark hair pulled into a ponytail and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. She wore hearing aids in both ears and watched their mouths carefully when they spoke. Hi, Mila, Daniel said clearly, making sure she could see his face. I'm Daniel. This is my wife, Victoria, and our daughters, Emma and Sophie. Mila's eyes lingered on Sophie, who was squirming in Victoria's arms, trying to get down. "She's little," Mila signed, and Janet translated for them. "She's 2, Emma said, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger. "She's loud and she gets into everything, but she's pretty cute. I'm Emma. I'm 7.5. Mila's expression softened slightly. "I'm 8, almost 9. They spent an hour together that first meeting, mostly sitting on the floor of the playroom while Emma showed Mila her favorite toys, and Sophie alternated between toddling around and demanding to be picked up. Daniel and Victoria watched, trying not to be too obvious about it, both of them falling a little bit in love with this serious, quiet child who seemed so much older than her years. "What do you think?" Daniel asked Victoria quietly, while Emma was explaining the complicated rules of some game she'd invented. "I think she's been hurt," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think she's learned not to trust easily, and I think I want to be the person who teaches her it's safe to trust again." The matching process took another 2 months, visits and meetings, slowly building a relationship with Mila, while the social workers assessed whether they were the right fit. Emma took to her role as almost big sister with enthusiasm, teaching Mila games and showing her around their house during supervised visits. Sophie was less sure, occasionally jealous of the attention this new person was getting, but gradually warming up. Daniel and Victoria threw themselves into learning sign language, practicing with each other at night until their hands ached and their brains felt full. Victoria hired a tutor and insisted on daily lessons, approaching it with the same intensity she brought to everything. "You're getting really good at this," Daniel observed one evening after watching her hold an entire signed conversation with their tutor. "I want to be able to communicate with our daughter," Victoria said simply. "Really communicate, not just make her read our lips all the time." Our daughter. Daniel felt something settle in his chest at those words. Mila wasn't officially theirs yet, wouldn't be for months still, but Victoria had already claimed her the way she'd claimed Sophie before she was even born, the way she'd claimed Emma without ever needing biology to justify it. The day Mila moved in permanently was in early October, almost 2 years after Sophie's birth and 18 months after Daniel and Victoria's wedding. Mila arrived with 2 garbage bags of belongings, everything she owned in the world fitting into trash bags, which broke Daniel's heart, and stood in the foyer of their home looking lost. "Your room is upstairs," Emma said, taking Mila's hand without hesitation. "Come on, I'll show you. We painted it purple because Janet said that's your favorite color." They'd spent weeks preparing Mila's room, Victoria insisting on getting every detail right. A comfortable bed with a weighted blanket that the occupational therapist had recommended, a desk position to catch natural light for drawing. Mila loved to draw. Bookshelves stocked with stories, some in sign language, some with pictures. A charging station for her hearing aids, everything chosen with care, with the singular goal of making this child feel safe and wanted. Mila stood in the doorway of her room, taking it all in, and when she turned back to face them, there were tears streaming down her face. "It's too much," she signed, her hands shaking slightly. "It's exactly enough," Victoria signed back, her own signing still a bit clumsy but earnest. "For you, because you're our daughter now, and we want you to feel at home." Mila broke then, the walls she'd so carefully constructed crumbling as she threw herself at Victoria, sobbing into her shoulder. Victoria held her tight, rocking slightly, her own tears falling into Mila's hair, and Daniel felt his throat close up, watching them. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Is Mila okay?" she whispered. "Yeah, Princess. She's more than okay." Daniel picked up Sophie, who was watching the scene with confused interest. "She's home." The first few months with Mila were an adjustment for everyone. She had nightmares frequently, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. She hoarded food in her room, unable to quite believe there would always be more. She flinched at sudden movements, tested boundaries constantly, pushed back against affection as if waiting for it to be withdrawn. "I don't think she believes we're keeping her," Victoria said one night after a particularly difficult day where Mila had lashed out at Emma over nothing. "She thinks this is temporary like every other placement she's had." "Then we show her it's not," Daniel said. "Every day, over and over, until she believes it." They developed routines, family dinners where everyone, even 2-year-old Sophie, took turns sharing something about their day, using both words and signs so Mila felt fully included. Saturday morning pancakes that Daniel always made, letting each kid add their own toppings. Sunday afternoons at the park, or the museum, or just around the house, doing nothing in particular but being together. Slowly, incrementally, Mila began to soften. She started calling them mom and dad without prompting. She stopped hoarding food. She had fewer nightmares. And one morning, about 4 months after she'd moved in, Daniel walked past her room to find her and Emma curled up on Emma's bed together, Emma reading aloud while Mila drew pictures to go with the story. "Don't," Victoria whispered, appearing beside him and pulling him back before he could interrupt. "Just look at them." Daniel looked. His daughters, all 3 of them now, because that's what Mila was, regardless of biology or paperwork, together. Emma's patient voice reading the same sentence twice when Mila couldn't hear it clearly the first time. Mila's complete focus on her art, tongue poking out in concentration. The easy comfort between them, like they'd been sisters their whole lives instead of just a few months. "We did good," Daniel said quietly. "We really did," Victoria agreed. The adoption was finalized the week before Christmas, almost 2 years to the day after Daniel and Victoria's courthouse wedding. The judge smiled as she signed the papers, officially making Mila a Carter Langford, and when she asked Mila if she had anything she wanted to say, Mila stood up and signed with perfect clarity. "I have a family now. A forever family. And I'm never letting them go." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. They celebrated that night with all of Mila's favorite foods and a cake that Emma had helped bake and Sophie had helped decorate, which meant it was lopsided and covered in too much frosting, but perfect anyway. Daniel watched his family around the dinner table, Emma chattering about her school play, Mila signing responses with increasing confidence, Sophie making a mess of her cake and giggling when Victoria tried to clean her face, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange journey that had brought them all here. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked later after the kids were all in bed and they were cleaning up the kitchen together. "That night you showed up at my door," Daniel said. "How angry I was. How certain I was that what you were proposing was wrong." Victoria paused in wiping down the counter. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" "Not even a little bit," Daniel said immediately. "I regret how long it took me to say yes. I regret the time we wasted being cautious when we should have been brave. But the decision itself, that changed my life, Victoria. It gave me you and Sophie and Mila. It gave Emma sisters and security and a mother who loves her. How could I possibly regret that?" Victoria set down her cloth and moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "I was so scared that night. Terrified you'd say no, terrified you'd say yes. I'd never wanted anything as much as I wanted a family, but I had no idea how to actually build one. And now? Now I know," Victoria said, pulling back to look at him. "Family isn't about biology or perfect plans. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "Look at you, getting all wise," Daniel teased gently. "I learned from the best," Victoria said, reaching up to kiss him. They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, and when they finally went upstairs, Daniel checked on each of the girls like he did every night. Emma was sprawled across her bed, covers kicked off, her favorite stuffed animal tucked under one arm. He pulled the blanket back over her and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Sophie was in her toddler bed, somehow managing to sleep perpendicular to how she'd started the night, her little face peaceful in sleep. Daniel adjusted her position carefully, tucking her beloved blanket closer. Mila's room was last. She slept with a nightlight now, and in its soft glow Daniel could see her breathing deeply, truly at rest in a way she hadn't been when she first arrived. Her hearing aids were in their charging station, her sketchbook on the nightstand showing a drawing she'd been working on, their whole family holding hands under a rainbow. "Sleep well, sweetheart," Daniel whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him but saying it anyway. Victoria was waiting in their bedroom when he returned, already changed for bed. They climbed under the covers together, and she immediately curled into his side, her familiar weight and warmth grounding him. "You know what Emma asked me today?" Victoria said quietly. "What's that?" "She asked if I was her real mom now. Not bio mom, but real mom." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "What did you say?" "I told her I'd been her real mom from the moment I decided to love her, which was about 5 minutes after meeting her in the park with that ridiculous kite." Victoria's voice wavered, and she said, "Good, because I've been thinking of you as my real mom for a while now, and I wanted to make sure it was okay." Victoria? She wants to call me Mom instead of Victoria, she continued, the words rushing out now. She said Mila gets to call me Mom, and Sophie calls me Mama, and she wants to call me Mom too. Is that okay? I know Sarah was her mother, and I would never try to replace her, but it's more than okay, Daniel said, his own voice thick with emotion. Sarah would love that you're there for Emma. She'd be grateful that our daughter has someone who loves her the way you do. Victoria was crying now, quiet tears that soaked into his shirt. I never thought I'd get to have this. Any of this. I thought I'd missed my chance, that I'd traded family for success and would spend the rest of my life alone. And then you opened that door and you were so angry, and somehow that anger turned into this. Best business decision I ever made, Daniel said, trying to lighten the moment. Victoria laughed through her tears. Worst business decision I ever made, honestly. The ROI on this arrangement has been terrible. Oh yeah, how do you figure? Well, I offered you $3 million for a baby and got saddled with a husband, 3 daughters, and a dog we still haven't talked about, but Emma keeps hinting she wants. No dog, Daniel said automatically. That's what I keep saying, but I have a feeling we're going to lose this battle. They lay there talking until late into the night, the way they often did, processing the day and making plans for tomorrow and remembering how far they'd come. And when they finally drifted off to sleep, wrapped around each other in the bed they shared in the house they'd made a home, Daniel felt the kind of peace he'd thought he'd lost forever when Sarah died. The years that followed brought their own challenges, of course. Emma hit middle school and discovered boys and attitude. Mila struggled sometimes with feeling different, with her hearing loss making certain situations difficult. Sophie turned out to have a stubborn streak that rivaled Victoria's and a talent for finding trouble that kept them constantly on their toes. There were arguments about homework and bedtimes and screen time. There were tears over friendship drama and school struggles and growing pains. There were moments when Daniel and Victoria locked themselves in their bathroom and wondered what they'd been thinking, taking on 3 kids when they barely knew how to be married. But there were also piano recitals where Mila played pieces she'd learned by feeling the vibrations, her face glowing with pride. There were school plays where Emma commanded the stage with confidence that made Daniel's heart swell. There were Sophie's endless questions about everything, her curious mind always working. There were family vacations where they laughed until they cried and took 1,000 pictures they'd never look at again but couldn't bear not to capture. There were quiet Sunday mornings where they all piled into the master bed, a tangle of limbs and laughter and love. There were moments when Daniel would catch Victoria watching their daughters with an expression of such wonder, like she still couldn't quite believe they were real. Moments when she'd take his hand across the dinner table and squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of how lucky they were. 5 years after Mila's adoption, Daniel came home from work to find the whole family in the backyard. Victoria was pushing Sophie on the swing while Emma and Mila played some elaborate game that seemed to involve a lot of running and shrieking. The dog they'd eventually caved on, a golden retriever named Pancake, courtesy of Sophie's naming rights, was barking and chasing the older girls in circles. Victoria looked up when she heard the gate and smiled, that same smile that had been surprising him with its warmth and genuineness for years now. Her hair was coming loose from its bun. There was what looked like paint on her shirt from helping Mila with an art project, and she'd never looked more beautiful. "Girls, Dad's home," Victoria called, and all 3 of them came running, Sophie launching herself at his legs, Emma giving him a quick hug before returning to her game, Mila signing an enthusiastic, "Hi, Dad," before dragging him over to see what she and Emma had built in the sandbox. This was his life now. This chaos, this noise, this overwhelming abundance of love. 5 years ago, he'd been drowning in bills and loneliness, convinced that struggling alone was somehow more honorable than accepting help. He'd been so certain he knew what was right, so afraid of change. And then Victoria had knocked on his door with her impossible proposal, and everything had changed. "How was work?" Victoria asked when he finally made it over to where she stood by the swing set. "Long. Boring. Not nearly as interesting as whatever's happening here." Emma and Mila are building the world's greatest sandcastle, which seems to involve at least 60 pounds of sand being transferred to locations other than the sandbox. Sophie has been asking when you're coming home every 5 minutes for the past hour. And Pancake ate something he shouldn't have and threw up on the kitchen floor, which I've cleaned up, but fair warning, it was impressive. Sounds like a typical Tuesday, Daniel said, sliding his arm around her waist. Typical, Victoria agreed, leaning into him. And perfect. They stood like that for a while, watching their daughters play, the late afternoon sun painting everything golden. In a few minutes, Victoria would start nagging everyone to come inside for dinner. Emma would complain about having to stop playing. Mila would need to be reminded twice because she couldn't hear the first call. Sophie would demand to be carried inside even though she was perfectly capable of walking. They'd all crowd around the dinner table talking over each other, and Daniel would have to referee at least 2 arguments before dessert. It would be chaotic and messy and occasionally frustrating. It would be absolutely perfect. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. Victoria looked up at him. "For what?" "For being brave enough to knock on my door that night. For not giving up when I was too stubborn to see what you were offering. For building this with me." He gestured to the backyard, to their daughters, to the life they'd created. "For all of it." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for saying yes, even though it took you forever and you were grumpy about it." "I was not grumpy." "You were extremely grumpy," Victoria interrupted. "You threw me out of your house." "Okay, fair point. But you came around eventually," she continued, reaching up to cup his face. "You always do. That's one of the things I love most about you, your capacity to change your mind when presented with new evidence." "Is that your fancy way of saying I'm stubborn?" "Among other things," Victoria said, and kissed him. "Mom! Dad! Come see!" Mila was signing frantically, pointing at something in the sandbox. "We're coming!" Victoria signed back, then looked at Daniel. "Duty calls." "Always," Daniel agreed, but he was smiling. They walked across the backyard together, hand in hand, toward their daughters who were waiting impatiently to show them something that probably wasn't as impressive as they thought, but would deserve their full attention anyway. And as Daniel knelt down in the sand beside Mila, feeling Sophie climb onto his back, and Emma lean against his shoulder, listening to Victoria praise their creation with genuine enthusiasm, he thought about how impossible this all would have seemed that night Victoria first appeared on his doorstep, how far they'd all come, how much they'd grown, how a business arrangement born from loneliness and desperation had transformed into something no amount of money could buy. A family, messy and complicated and absolutely real. That night, after dinner and homework and bedtime battles, after all 3 girls were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Daniel found Victoria in their bedroom, standing at the window, looking out at the backyard where their daughters had played. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Everything," Victoria said softly. "All of it. How I almost didn't knock on your door that night because I was terrified you'd say yes, and I'd have to actually follow through with my insane plan." "But you did knock." "But I did," she agreed, "because sometimes the scariest thing and the right thing are the same thing." Daniel pulled her close, and they stood together in the darkness, looking out at the life they'd built. A life that started with an outrageous proposal and evolved into something neither of them could have predicted or planned. A life that proved family wasn't about biology or conventional paths, but about showing up every day and choosing to love, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. "I'd do it all again," Victoria whispered. "Every awkward conversation, every fight, every terrifying moment of uncertainty. I'd do it all again to end up right here." "So would I," Daniel said, and meant it with everything in him. Because this beautiful, chaotic, imperfect family was worth every second of doubt, every moment of fear, every risk they'd taken to build it. It was everything he'd never known he needed and everything he couldn't imagine living without. It was home. And as Victoria turned in his arms to kiss him, as the house settled into sleep around them, as their daughters dreamed in their beds down the hall, Daniel felt profound gratitude for the impossible proposal that had changed everything, for the woman brave enough to make it, for the family they'd chosen to become, for the love they'd learned to build, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time.